if you could take centuries of human history, I mean, everything from a global flood that resets civilization all the way to the birth of major empires and their eventual collapse, and see it all woven into a single massive story?
That is, in a nutshell, the monumental task of 14th century historian Ibn-e-Khaldun took on. And for this deep dive, we are tackling a huge piece of that work. Volume 2 of his Tareekh, or The History of Ibn Khaldun.
And it's not just a history book, is it? It's an epic.
It's absolutely an epic. The scale is just dizzying. Our mission here is to try and distill this thing. It starts with what he calls the history of the prophets, which is like the foundational mythos of humanity.
And then it just keeps going.
Right. It sweeps straight into the really tumultuous, the first decades of the Islamic Caliphate. We're talking about events stretching across Arabia, Syria, Iraq, Persia, Egypt, all the way into North Africa.
We're literally covering millennia in a single conversation.
We are. And this matters for you, the listener, because Khaldun isn't just listing dates and names. He's building the genealogical and chronological scaffolding that these civilizations use to define themselves.
So it's about their worldview.
Exactly. It explains why things like lineage and ancient events mattered so much for political legitimacy, even centuries later.
Okay, so we have to start where he starts.
Yeah.
At the very beginning, let's unpack this huge framework in part 1, the foundations of man and earth.
So the entire premise, the absolute foundation of this history, is that everyone, all of human civilization after the Great Flood, can be traced back to 3 men.
The sons of Noah.
The sons of Noah,
Yeah.
Sam, who's also known as Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Khaldun's work doesn't just mention them. It basically creates a political world map based on who descended from whom.
That is a remarkable way to frame global history. So he's not just saying these people existed. He's saying this is where they went and this is who they became.
In meticulous detail, you look at the line of Sam, for example. He anchors them in what he sees as the geographical heartland.
Which would be?
Well, his text links them to Persia, to the Arabs, and we'll get into the 2 types of Arabs he defines, and to the people of Syria. So right away, the cradles of civilization, the core of the later Islamic Empire, they're all established as coming from this primary patriarchal line.
Okay, and that mapping approach continues with the other 2 sons.
It does. With Ham, the lineage is associated pretty clearly with Africa. So Egypt, Sudan, and North Africa, what he calls the Maghrib.
And that was the accepted tradition at the time.
It seems to be. He even notes a specific belief that the people of the West, the Maghrib, came from Ham's son, a figure named Kaft. But what's really interesting is that Khaldun, as a good historian, notes some disagreement. He says some sources debated whether Ham's line was actually older than the others.
So he's showing his work in a way. He's not just stating dogma.
Exactly. He's trying to reconcile different historical reports he has access to. And then finally, you've got Japheth.
And where does he fit in?
Japheth is linked to the groups on the periphery to the north and east, specifically the Turks and other peoples like the Khazars and the Sakalaba, who would recognize today as the Slavs.
So this map covers a huge territory, from Arabia all the way to Eastern Europe, all unified under this single story of repopulation after the flood.
And Noah himself, or Nu, is the ultimate starting point. The text notes his incredible lifespan, 950 years, and frames the flood as this necessary reset. It means that any political or territorial claim that comes after is, by definition, based on your descent from one of these 3 sons.
Lineage is the first form of political legitimacy.
It's everything. And from that big picture, Khaldun then zooms in on the first real centers of political power, the first kingdoms. He focuses on tribes like Alad and Thamud.
These are what, early Arab tribes?
Foundational ones, yes. And for him, their stories aren't just myths, they're moral and political case studies. He traces the lineage of Alad back through figures like Iram and Uz. He recounts the story of the prophet Hud being sent to Ad and another prophet, Salah, sent to Thamud.
And the story's always the same, right? They become powerful, they reject the prophet.
And they are destroyed, yes. But the lesson Khaldun is drawing from it is deeply political.
How so?
He's showing that political power, when it's divorced from, a just and righteous foundation, is inherently unstable. Adad and Thamud had wealth, they had amazing architecture, but they lacked the moral discipline, the asabiya, to last. Their destruction is a template for the rise and fall of dynasties that he'll analyze later.
That's fascinating. So at the same time as these Arabian stories are unfolding, you've got the huge empires popping up in Mesopotamia.
Right. And the text focuses heavily on Nimrod, or Namrud. He's presented as the king of Babylon and Mosul. And this is where we see the first major clash between organized state power, this huge pagan system, and a single prophet's lineage, specifically the lineage of Abraham or Ibrahim.
So Nimrod is the embodiment of the state.
He is. Khaldun notes that Nimrod's entire system of governance was based on idol and star worship. That was the state religion of Babylon. So he's a symbol of entrenched earthly power. And Abraham is the lone voice of truth challenging it.
It sets up a conflict that we're going to see again and again
throughout the entire Tareekh. And the narrative follows this Mesopotamian power, from Nimrod to other kings like Zaradush and, very importantly, Bakhtar-Narsar,
who we would know as Nebuchadnezzar.
That's the one. And his story is crucial because Khaldun links him directly to a major event in the prophetic timeline, the destruction of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, the Beit al-Maqdis.
So these empires aren't just neighbors. They're instruments of history, shaping the fate of the people of the book.
Precisely. They're mechanisms of divine judgment, or at least historical consequence, that define the entire timeline.
Okay, so after laying out these massive external empires, the focus swings back to Arabia itself. And this is where he makes a really critical distinction.
This is maybe one of the most important details for understanding everything that comes later. He categorizes the Arabs into two groups: the Ariba, or original Arabs, and the Mustariba, the Arabized Arabs.
Let's break that down. Who are the Ariba?
The original Arabs are mostly associated with the lineage of a figure named Qahtan, who is often equated with the biblical Joktan. They are the basis for the South Arabian or Yemeni peoples.
The settled ancient kingdoms of the South.
Exactly. They had cities, they had dams, they had sophisticated cultures long before the 7th century. They were the originals.
And the Mustariba, the Arabized Arabs.
Now, their lineage is traced through Adnan and ultimately all the way back to Ishmael, the son of Abraham.
So they're Arabized because Abraham and Ishmael weren't originally from there.
Right. They came from outside, from Mesopotamia and Canaan, and adopted the language and culture. And this Adnanid line is absolutely paramount because this is the line that produces the Quraysh tribe.
The tribe of the Prophet Muhammad.
The very one. So the legitimacy of the ultimate ruling tribe of Islam is anchored not in the original Arabs of Yemen, but in this lineage that connects directly back to Abraham through Ishmael.
Which means the story of Ishmael has to be central to this whole history.
It is. The source gives a lot of detail. His birth, his mother Hagar being taken to the valley of Mecca, the miracle of the Zamzam well springing up.
And it connects him to the land itself.
It does. And a really critical detail the source notes is that Ishmael is credited with teaching his children the Arabic language. So the language itself becomes part of this sacred prophetic lineage. And his descendants become the ruling power in the Hijaz.
So part one really sets the stage. We have the three sons of Noah defining the world map, the rise and fall of pagan empires acting as moral lessons, and then this incredibly detailed grounding of the Quraysh tribe in the Abrahamic tradition.
It's a foundational narrative that's making a very powerful claim. It's saying that the events of the 7th century didn't just come out of nowhere. They were the culmination of a political and genealogical journey that spanned thousands of years.
All right, moving into part two. The focus shifts fully onto that Abrahamic lineage. We're following the story as it moves across the map, which really sets the stage for, well, for massive geopolitical changes.
It does. The source gives a very detailed account of Ibrahim, starting with his origins in Ur. It emphasizes his challenge to the idol worship of his people and, of course, the famous story of his miraculous survival from Nimrod's fire.
Which establishes him as being divinely protected from the greatest earthly power of his time.
Right. That's his defining moment. And once that authority is established, he begins the migrations that really define the next 1,000 years of history. He moves from Ur to Canaan, later to Egypt.
He's basically mapping out the Fertile Crescent for his descendants.
That's a great way to put it. And the narrative then follows his line through his son Isaac, or Ishak, whose birth is presented as a divine blessing, and then Isaac's son Jacob, or Yaqub.
Jacob's sons are the Bani Israel, the children of Israel. But the story takes a huge turn with one of those sons, Yusuf, in Egypt.
Joseph's story is the pivot. It's the narrative that explains how the entire community of Bani Israel ends up living outside of their promised land. The history covers his whole story, the betrayal by his brothers, his rise to power under the Egyptian ruler Al-Malik.
And his success is what brings the rest of his family to Egypt.
Exactly. A move that seems like a blessing at first, but, well, centuries later, it turns into a total disaster.
And this relocation sets up the next great mass movement in the Tareekh, the narrative of Moses and the Exodus.
The source really emphasizes the context here. Generations have passed since Joseph's time, and the Bani Israel have become slaves under a new oppressive pharaoh or pharaoh.
So the story of Moses, or Musa, is given a lot of weight.
Immense weight. It covers his whole life. His birth, being saved from the river, his exile after he killed a man. The text refers to the legal concept of kisus, or retaliation.
So he's a fugitive.
He is. He flees to Midian, where he stays with tribe. This period of exile is presented as being essential. He has to become a leader before he can return as the leader.
And his return isn't just a political rebellion, it's a spiritual one.
It's a full-blown revolution against the state religion of Egypt. He's teaching a new faith. The source documents the whole conflict, the escalation, the 10 plagues, and it all culminates in that foundational event, the migration, the hijrah of the Bani Israel out of Egypt,
The crossing of the Red Sea.
the crossing of the Red Sea, and the destruction of the Pharaoh's army. In this historical framework, it's the first great, successful, prophetic liberation movement.
But what happens after the escape is just as important for building a nation.
Oh, absolutely. The narrative post-Exodus is all about establishing a legal and spiritual foundation. This is when the Torah is given. It's when they build the tabernacle, the portable sanctuary.
But there are immediate challenges.
Right away, Khaldun includes the story of the golden calf, instigated by a figure named Samiri. Moses' fury at this is a key moment. It leads to the establishment of the rule of law. It solidifies them as a community that is now defined by a shared legal and moral code, not just by shared suffering.
So, once the law is established, the focus shifts to consolidating power, to kingship. The source tracks the move from judges to actual kings, like Saul, David, and Solomon.
Yes, Talut, Daud, and Suleiman. These are the figures who establish a permanent political center. The Chronicle mentions David's famous battle against Goliath-Jalut, which secures the kingdom.
And then Solomon builds the temple.
And that is a huge moment. Solomon is credited with the reconstruction of the Holy Temple, the Beit al-Maqdis. This physical structure becomes the spiritual and geographical anchor for the whole region. It really sets the stage for every single conflict and invasion that follows.
A consolidated kingdom is always a target for bigger empires, and this brings in the next major force, the Greek wave.
This is where Khaldun brilliantly weaves what we call world history into his narrative. He gives a detailed account of Alexander the Great, whom he calls Iskandar Dul-Qarnayn.
Dul-Qarnayn, the two-horned one.
Exactly. He's this world-altering figure. The text describes his conquests, his sudden death, and then the crucial division of his empire among his generals.
How does Khaldun see him? Is he just a foreign conqueror?
It's more complex. By using the title Dul-Qarnayn, he's integrating Alexander into a tradition that sometimes sees this figure as a righteous, powerful ruler with global authority. It shows Khaldun trying to find a place for even these massive non-Abrahamic shifts in power within a single purposeful timeline.
And the empires that came out of Alexander's, the Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucids in Syria, they have a direct impact on the Bani Israel.
A profound and immediate impact. They controlled the land. And the Chronicle notes that this period brings yet another destruction of the temple. This cycle of building and destruction becomes a recurring theme, setting the stage for the later Roman and Byzantine dominance.
So while all this is happening in the West, the Chronicle keeps an eye on the East, on the Persian dynasties.
Right. He details the rulers of Persia, figures like Dora and Cyrus. He's emphasizing the constant rivalry. For centuries, the whole Near East is defined by this struggle between the Western powers, first the Greeks, then the Romans, and the Eastern power of Persia.
And this constant grinding conflict is the backdrop for everything that happens next.
It's the indispensable backdrop.
Yeah.
We've now established the players, the genealogical inheritors waiting in Arabia, and these two tired, colossal, rival empires surrounding them, constantly weakening each other. The stage is perfectly set.
So as we move into part 3, the world is dominated by these two superpowers, the Byzantine Romans and the Sassanid Persians, the rival empires.
And Khaldun's history makes it clear that their centuries of warfare had left them both profoundly drained. Politically, financially, militarily, they were exhausted.
Which creates a power vacuum.
A perfect power vacuum, right in the middle of which sits pre-Islamic Arabia, what's often called the Jahiliyyah.
The age of ignorance.
Right, and the source details the political situation there, but it focuses on key events that establish the sanctity of Mecca. The most famous one, of course, is the story of Abraham.
The king from Abyssinia who tried to destroy the Kaaba.
Exactly. The story of the army of the elephant, the Ashab al-Fil, and the Chronicle emphasizes the role of Abd al-Muttalib, the prophet's own grandfather, in confronting Abraham,
And the miraculous destruction of the army.
which happens just before the prophet's birth. This event reinforces Mecca's status as a divinely protected site, and it gives huge prestige to the people of Mecca, the Quraysh.
The source also looks south to the ancient Yemeni kingdoms.
It does. It includes the complex story of a ruler named Saif bin Yazan. He manages to kick the Abyssinians out of Yemen, but, and this is a crucial detail, he can only do it by getting help from the Persian king, Khusro.
So even the Arab kingdoms were already entangled in the great power politics of the Sassanid Empire.
Deeply entangled, Arabian politics were never happening in a vacuum, so the scene is set. A war-weary world, a spiritually important center in Mecca, and a ruling tribe, the Quraysh, that traces its lineage directly to Ishmael, which brings us, naturally, to the life of the Prophet Muhammad.
And the Chronicle lays out the key events.
It does. His birth, his marriage to the influential businesswoman Khadija, the beginning of the revelations, the Wahi, and the subsequent invitation to Islam. But the focus quickly shifts to the intense persecution the early Muslims faced in Mecca.
This pressure from the established Meccan elite, it becomes unbearable.
It does, and that leads to the seminal event that starts the Islamic calendar, the migration, the hijrah to Medina. This isn't just a move, it's a complete political transformation
From a persecuted minority.
to a self-governing political and military entity. Khaldun details the whole thing. The plot against the Prophet's life, the dangerous journey, and the welcome they receive in Medina, which was then called Yathrib. This is the moment the story shifts from just teaching to actual governance.
And governance immediately means conflict. The source details these major early conflicts, starting with the Battle of Badr.
Badr is so important because it's their first real military test. And they win, despite being hugely outnumbered by the Quraysh. Khaldun analyzes it, the causes, the events, and concludes that it was proof.
Proof of what?
Proof that the spiritual and communal bond they had forged in Medina, their asabiyah, was strong enough to defeat a superior force. It validated the entire new political order.
But that success is followed by a setback at the Battle of Uhud.
Uhud is presented as a harsh lesson, a lesson in discipline. The narrative focuses on the small group of archers who abandoned their post, leading to a near disaster. It showed just how fragile the new state still was.
Then comes a huge test of that fragility. The Battle of the Trench, or Khandak.
This was a massive siege of Medina itself. A huge alliance of Meccan and other tribes came to wipe them out. And Khaldun details the innovative defense, digging the trench, and the long, difficult siege. Surviving Khandak proved that Medina could withstand the full force of the old Arabian order.
After all this fighting, the focus shifts to diplomacy with the Treaty of Hudaybiyah.
Which is a diplomatic masterstroke. On the surface, it looked like a bad deal for the Muslims. They had to make major concessions. But Khaldun, like many historians, emphasizes the long-term effects.
It bought them time.
It bought them peace. And in that period of peace, Islam spread more rapidly through diplomacy than it ever had through war. It allowed them to consolidate their power and set the stage for the final victory.
Which comes quickly after. First, the conquest of Khaybar.
The battle against the Jewish tribes of the Khaybar Oasis, and then finally the big one, the conquest of Mecca, the Fath Makkah.
And the source notes that this was largely peaceful.
Almost bloodless. It was the ultimate political validation. The prophet returns to the city he was exiled from, not as a conqueror seeking revenge, but as a leader. The cleansing of the idols from the Kaaba cements the political and religious authority of the new state over the entire Arabian Peninsula.
It's an incredible transformation. In just over 2 decades, they go from a tiny, persecuted group to the dominant force in Arabia, ready to expand onto the world stage.
And it happened with breathtaking speed. It's a testament to the power of that unified asabiyah, that group cohesion that was forged during the Hijrah and then tested in these battles.
Okay, so we've reached the post-prophetic era, part 4. A period Ibn-e-Khaldun covers with incredible detail. The rightly guided caliphs, the Khulafa-e-Rashidin. It's an age of stunning expansion, but also of deep internal fractures appearing for the first time.
This is where the story gets really complex. It begins immediately with Abu Bakr's caliphate. He's chosen as the first successor, and right away he's hit with a massive challenge. The Ridda Wars, or Wars of Apostasy.
Now, that name, Wars of Apostasy, it sounds purely religious, But Khaldun must see it as a political crisis.
Oh, absolutely. It was a crisis of state integrity. Many of the tribes had accepted the prophet's spiritual authority, but they weren't willing to pay the zakat, the religious tax, to a central government in Medina after he died.
So they were basically seceding.
They were, and Abu Bakr's decision to go to war over it was critical. It established the precedent that the Islamic State was a single, unified political and financial entity, not just a loose confederation of believers.
And at the same time, the first conquests outside of Arabia began.
Yes, the early push into Iraq and Syria, with the brilliant general Khalid bin Walid leading the charge.
Then we get to Umar's caliphate, which is just defined by this explosion of territory.
Unparalleled expansion. The source documents the decisive battles that shattered the old superpowers. The Battle of Yarmouk against the Byzantines and the Battle of Qadisiyah against the Sassanid Persians. These weren't just victories, they were the end of an era.
And the expansion was so fast. The conquest of Egypt, led by Amr bin As. How does Khaldun explain how they managed to govern all this new land?
This is where Khaldun's analysis as a sociologist really shines. He sees Umar not just as a conqueror, but as an administrative genius. He set up the diwans, the government registers for paying the soldiers. He established garrison cities, the Amsar, to keep the Arab armies separate from the local populations.
Why was that so important?
To prevent their warrior spirit, their asabiya, from decaying. To keep them disciplined. These innovations were essential for making the empire governable. And Umar's era culminates with the peaceful surrender of Jerusalem, the Beit al-Maqdis.
A huge symbolic victory. But then comes Uthman's caliphate. The expansion continues into North Africa and Cyprus, and he oversees the huge project of compiling the Quran. But this is where the trouble starts.
This is where the fitna, the sedition, really begins to brew. Khaldun analyzes the causes. There were accusations of nepotism, that Uthman was favoring his own Umayyad relatives with powerful governorships.
The economic pressures, too.
Big ones. All this wealth pouring in from the new territories was creating new social classes and resentments. The gap between the pious early companions and the newly powerful political elite was growing.
And this friction just escalates and escalates.
It does. It leads to open conflict, to a siege on Uthman's own house, and finally to his martyrdom, his shahadat. And Khaldun frames this as the point of no return, the end of the Golden Age and the beginning of the First Great Civil War.
Which brings us directly to Ali's caliphate. He basically inherits a state on fire.
An ungovernable state. He faced immediate challenges to his authority. The source details the major battles of his reign. First, the Battle of the Camel, the Jang and Jamal, where he had to fight forces led by Aisha, the prophet's widow.
A battle between the prophet's closest family and companions.
A tragedy. And that's followed by the long, grinding stalemate of the Battle of Siffin against the powerful governor of Syria, Muawiyah.
And Siffin ends not with a victory, but with a disastrous arbitration, the Takim.
Which was politically fatal for Ali. The arbitration process questioned his legitimacy, and Muawiyah, who had a very disciplined and unified base of support in Syria, was able to basically wait him out. Ali's support base in Iraq was much more fractured.
And the arbitration itself causes another fracture, the emergence of the Kharijites.
The Khawarijis. They were a radical group who broke away from Ali, arguing that by agreeing to arbitration, he had betrayed God's law. They said, judgment belongs to God alone. They rejected both Ali and Muawiyah.
So another faction is born out of the chaos.
A hyper-puritanical and violent one. Ali had to fight them as well at the Battle of Nahrawan. It just shows how deeply the community had splintered.
And the end result of all this conflict is the transition to Muawiyah.
After Ali is assassinated by a Kharijite, his son, Hassan, briefly becomes caliph. But the history describes Hassan making a strategic choice to abdicate and hand power to Muawiyah to end the bloodshed. And this moment officially establishes the hereditary Umayyad dynasty, with the capital moving from the heartland to Damascus.
The transition to a monarchy is complete, but the conflicts are far from over.
They just change shape. The history immediately dives into the defining and often brutal events of the early Umayyad period, starting with the caliphate of Muawiyah's son, Yazid effect.
And this is where we get to one of the most resonant events in Islamic history, the tragedy of Karbala.
Khaldun gives a detailed account. The journey of Hussein bin Ali, the prophet's other grandson, his refusal to pledge allegiance to Yazid, the siege at Karbala, and the subsequent martyrdom of Hussein and his small band of followers.
This wasn't just a battle.
No, it was the political assassination of the most potent symbol of the prophet's sacred lineage. And the Chronicle details the brutal aftermath. Karbala cemented Umayyad rule through force, but it also planted the seeds of a powerful opposition movement that would haunt them for the next century.
At the same time, there was another major challenge to Umayyad rule back in the Hijaz.
Abdullah bin Zubayr's revolt. He based himself in Mecca and declared himself caliph, presenting a direct challenge to Damascus. This led to more devastation. The Umayyad army sacked Medina in the Battle of Hara and then besieged Mecca itself, eventually killing Abdullah bin Zubayr.
It shows their willingness to use overwhelming force, even against the holy cities.
Absolutely. Centralization at any cost. And the history then moves through the later Umayyad rulers, like the great centralizer Abd al-Malik bin Marwan and the famously iron-fisted governor of Iraq, Hajjaj bin Yusuf.
Hajjaj is presented as the symbol of Umayyad authoritarian control.
He was the one who ruthlessly put down all the internal rebellions that were constantly flaring up, especially from the Kharijites and other factions in the east, in Iraq and Khorasan. The Umayyad state was constantly fighting just to hold itself together.
And that constant pressure eventually leads to the end, the Abbasid Revolution.
The center of opposition shifts definitively to the eastern province of Khorasan. It's led by this charismatic figure, Abu Muslim al-Khorasani, who masterfully channels all the resentment against the Damascus-based Umayyads.
And this movement succeeds.
It does. The history describes the final military collapse of the Umayyads and the establishment of a new dynasty, the Abbasids, under their first caliph, Abu al-Abbas. The center of the Islamic world shifts from Syria to Iraq, and this grand historical sweep of Volume 2 comes to an end.
It's incredible. The story starts with the sons of Noah repopulating the earth and ends with the collapse of the largest empire the world had seen up to that point.
We have covered an insane amount of ground. We trace this entire historical framework, starting with that foundational genealogical split of mankind right after the flood.
We then followed the Great Migrations and the establishment of spiritual traditions, the exodus out of Egypt, the defining Hijra to Medina.
And we tracked the rise and fall of ancient empires like Babylon and Persia, all leading to the seismic internal conflicts, the fitna, that defined the early Islamic state, from the administrative brilliance of Umar to the brutal centralism of Hajjaj.
The thing that really strikes me is the continuity. The way the lineage of the Arab tribes is so meticulously traced back to Abrahamic figures. It shows how those ancient stories were used to justify political structures and conflicts centuries later.
It's a single, unified story where ancestry is always political. And, Khaldun dedicates so much space to these internal conflicts, the succession crises, Karbala, the endless revolts. So if this political structure, which was founded on such a powerful spiritual basis and this incredible initial cohesion, their asabiya, if it was so repeatedly fractured by these immediate conflicts over who had the right to lead, what does that really tell us about political power itself?
It seems to suggest that while a sacred mandate or noble lineage provides the moral authority to start something, the ability to actually hold power comes down to something else.
Like what?
Like organizational coherence, military discipline, and, the willingness to be ruthless to crush dissent.
I think that's exactly right. The historical weight of a figure like Hussein comes from his power to inspire a righteous opposition. But the ability to actually run the kingdom at that moment was defined by the political and military might of figures like Muawiyah.
And the fall of the Umayyads to the Abbasids, because of another internal movement, just proves the point all over again. It's a cycle.
It's Khaldun's core observation. The moment a dynasty loses its cohesion, its ability to govern justly and effectively, a new cycle of conflict is already starting somewhere else.
A profound point to leave you with. If every dynasty is doomed to decay once its foundational unity is gone, then what, historically, is the real difference between a righteous caliphate and just another kingdom? What truly defines political longevity? Something to think about. This has been the deep dive into Volume 2 of Tareekh-e-Ibn-e-Khaldoon.